All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. This is the first of two information sessions that we will be holding for the MSP region on this EDA CARES Act funding opportunity. We have a lot to share. This is an introduction probably to many of you to the work that has been going on in creating the Regional Economic Framework, which is the document that EDA will be looking for us as applicants to attach to our project application. So we'll get into that in some more depth. And I have some great partners on the line with Met Council and the Center for Economic Inclusion. And we're going to be able to give you a briefing on that update. And then we have a couple of really great expert speakers who are here to share with us their experience working with EDA and putting projects together for EDA funding opportunities. So this is an introduction for many of us to the EDA, the federal EDA, and their funding opportunities. As a region, we haven't had a lot of experience working with EDA, though many of you individually may have. So it's okay. Any questions you have about working with EDA, that's good. That's why we have a couple of really great friends online who are going to be able to answer questions about the opportunity. Let's see if I can, oops. Hang on one sec. There we go. All right, so just a quick reminder to save the date for June 25th. We'll be having another information session, and that one will have our EDA representative who's based in Chicago. He will be on the line to answer all of our questions and help us troubleshoot these opportunities for funding requests. He is the guy for us. You know, he's the one who is our person to contact with our potential project opportunities, and he's the one who's going to help guide us in the best opportunities for our region. So an invitation will be sent after today to sign up for that session. And depending on the questions that we get after this one, we may bring back some more help to talk about EDA funding opportunities. Whatever we may be hearing, our concerns or questions from the community, will build that agenda around. So for now, know that we will have Darren Fleener, our EDA rep. I've also included, I have included Darren's contact information in this slide deck. So this will be included in the recorded version of this information session, but you'll also have access to this slide deck afterwards. And this is his full contact information. Nicole tells us, and we're gonna be hearing from her soon, that it's okay to text him. So I give you all permission now that I'm feeling like I know the inside scoop, to email, to text, to call, all the things to get in touch with Darren. All right, so today we have three real segments to the information session. The first 30 minutes, we're going to be talking about the Regional Economic Framework. That is the work of GREATER MSP, Met Council, and the Center for Economic Inclusion in qualifying the region for EDA funds. This is a necessary step of documenting our regional strategy before we can qualify for these dollars. They want to make sure that the projects that are being submitted for consideration for EDA funding are consistent and relevant with a regional economic development strategy. So we're going to be talking through that project and where we are with that project. We'll then be transitioning over to hearing from Lynn Knight and Nicole Brunswick, who are going to be giving us some really great intel on this CARES Act funding opportunity. And then we will have hopefully a pretty good chunk of time to talk through some question and answer and open it up for some discussion. I know at this point, many people are just trying to figure out what would be an eligible project. How should we prioritize projects? What is EDA looking for with this particular funding opportunity? I'll do a quick intro now of our speakers, and then we will come back to them in just a moment. Lynn Knight is with GREATER Partnership Strategies, a consulting group. She has phenomenal experience working with EDA. She used to be on staff with the IEDC, which is our economic development professional association. She has written many grants to EDA She is really considered a subject matter expert in this space, especially with the disaster recovery project. So really looking forward to hearing from Lynn, and she lives in the DC area. Nicole Grunswick is the executive director of the Region 9 Development Commission. She's down in Mankato. And Region 9 is a regional development organization in the state of Minnesota. Not many of you, I didn't know this, and not many of you may know, but much of the state is broken up into these regional development groups. And they work very closely with EDA and are considered or designated economic development districts by EDA. So they have a strong relationship with EDA, a relationship that our metro just doesn't have. We've never been an economic development district as designated by EDA, and we are still not an economic development district. So this is kind of new territory for us, but not for Nicole. She's got great experience and can bring in some really great examples of working with not only EDA, but specifically our regional representative, Darren Fleener, and can give us more insight into a good way to approach this work with him. Okay, so before we get into all of the great insight from those two, we're going to start with the regional economic framework. And this is the document that will be attached to your application that you submit to EDA. It is a necessary attachment in addition to a lot of other information that you would need to submit to EDA. But we as a region have never had one of these. We've had regional economic development strategies and comprehensive plans, but we've never had this document created that meets the requirements of EDA. So I'm going to jump into it, but I want to acknowledge that Mike Larson with Met Council is on the line. He has been a really core leader in developing this document. And so I want to acknowledge him, and then certainly anything that I'm saying that he's like, whoa, Amanda, what, what are you saying? Mike, feel free to jump in. I certainly want you to provide some additional context wherever it is needed. I also want to acknowledge the Center for Economic Inclusion. I think I saw Tawana is on the line. I'm not sure, Andrea, but they are also partnering on this work. Really important that we are representing this region and all of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats in our region. It is more critical than ever that we get it right now, as we are representing some real challenges in our region around economic injustice and racial inequities and disparities. And we are ensuring that this document reflects those challenges and that it prioritizes actions that will serve to overcome those challenges. So thank you, Center for Economic Inclusion, for also being on. I'm going to jump in. Okay, so what is this? I've given a little bit of context, but the idea here is that EDA requires us to have this document to attach to our applications. It is a regional economic development strategy, and the term actually to EDA is a comprehensive economic development strategy, or a CEDS. So you may have heard that term, CEDS, but since we are not an economic development district per EDA, as I was just describing, like Region 9 is, we are not required to have a CEDS that is approved by EDA, but we are required to have something that meets the same level of requirement of what is included in the document, and it is attached to those applications. And so ours is actually not a CEDS, it is a CEDS alternative. So it is not approved by EDA, but it is reviewed with every funding application that they receive. And they will be looking for consistency and relevancy between the project that is being applied for funding assistance and the CEDS alternative. So our document is called the Regional Economic Framework, or the REF. We refer to it in that way, but it does meet the requirement of a CEDS alternative for EDA. So there's kind of this clear distinction between this document that we're working on to get prepared, and then what would be applications for funding that you are here to learn more about. And you would all have access to this document to attach to your application when you are submitting it. So the good news is we didn't start from scratch when we started talking about the need for this SEDS alternative in qualifying our region for these EDA dollars. And Met Council and Greater MSP started talking late last year about this. Does it make sense for our region to have this document? Will we need it? Most EDA funding opportunity programs exist to support areas of high distress, economic distress, or are there for recovery assistance. So you think if there's a flood and your area has received a designation by EDA as having received flooding impact, you would qualify. But we've never again had this document that would qualify us for other programs that aren't directly related to an economic or a disaster recovery. So we already have had a great deal of work done on a regional strategy. The Greater MSP Partnership, much over 2019, spent time in the region developing strategic priorities for a regional strategy. And I'm going to get into those in a few slides. But that is really the core of this regional economic framework, is the work that has been done through the partnership in developing the strategic priorities for the region. Oh, so the point is, a lot of work has already been done. A great deal of partner engagement has taken place. So we were at a really good starting point. And that's, I mean, not to diminish also the great research and planning work done by Met Council through the 2040 Thrive Comprehensive Plan. So much insight and intelligence through that planning process, also making up the real foundation of this document. As I said, this project, the Regional Economic Framework, is being driven by Greater MSP, by Met Council, and by Center for Economic Inclusion. We have team members from all three organizations who are working on drafting this document. And many of you on this call as partners have been engaged in this and have heard briefings over the last couple months of our progress. It's a big project. It is a big, an important document that reflects the priorities for our region. But EDA has told us from the beginning, you know, keep this simple. Use what you have. This is not the time to be creating something new, although I will point out there's a lot of new activity right now in the region that we want to make sure is reflected. But use these existing strategy documents and planning documents to inform this document. We do have to get it adopted. So Met Council, as the 7-county planning organization, is an eligible governing body that can adopt this document. So that is the goal here soon, to get the Regional Economic Framework adopted. I'm going to talk about that timeline in just a minute. Finally, as I've stated, this document must be attached to project applications in order for EDA to approve funding. So quickly, I'll point out, I mentioned Region 9. That is an economic development district in the state of Minnesota that has a SEDS. They update it regularly. Within our 15-county metro area, which is this dark blue line, there are economic development districts that cross in. So you can see several counties are covered by SEDS strategies outside of the one we're talking about right now. So there's really great representation and coverage for EDA throughout the 15-county metro. But you'll see the 7 counties that didn't have coverage are our 7 counties that make up the core of the metro area. And that's what this document will cover. It will cover the 7-county metro area. If you are on and you are located, your potential project would be impacting any of these counties that are outside the 7-county, you will want to touch base with the economic development district that covers your community. I'll point out Wright County and Sherburne County are not an economic development district, but they have combined with Benton and Stearns to create their own SEDS alternative. So similar to what we're doing right now, they have coverage because they have put together a document that meets the needs of EDA, even though they are not a designated economic development district. Okay, So I mentioned already that there's a lot of foundational work that's already taken place in getting us to where we are right now with the regional economic framework. We have a strong history of comprehensive planning and economic development and a lot of great collaboration across partners. Many of the issues in the regional economic framework are well understood. And many of the actions and projects that are mentioned have already taken place. So there's a really great foundation of work that's already been done. We do start to address new issues, and you'll see that reflected in the 9 strategic priorities that I'll show in just a moment. But do know that there was a great deal of engagement that took place to develop these 9 strategic priorities. And the way that we talk about actions towards these priorities are both representing action already taking place or representing some action that needs to take place in order for us to accelerate and advance towards the goals of those 9 priorities. So the key elements of this regional economic framework. There is a regional background. This is an overview of the region, a great kind of just foundational context for our workforce, our population trends, our sectors of strength and our industry clusters, where we've seen industry growth, in workforce development, what programs exist, what have been challenges in workforce development, infrastructure development and transportation. So all the really foundational stuff about the region is included in this background section. There's a strengths, weakness, and opportunities and threats section. This is really a core piece to this document in that it represents where we see greatest opportunity for improvement and lays the foundation for the 9 strategic priorities. The strategic direction and action plan, this is the section that we represent the 9 priorities and get into some depth on what partners are involved in the work, what are existing programs and initiatives for each of those priorities, and then what are the actions that need to be taken. The implementation framework, this is a list of metrics that are important for us to track our progress over time. Finally, I want to point out the role of resilience in this document. Resilience is a really important word to EDA. It's a really important word to our region right now as we think about recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly a great deal of the civil unrest that has taken place because of the racial inequities in our region. And so it's important for us to represent in this document the resilience, and that's not only how we plan to frame COVID-19 recovery and where we've seen the greatest impact from COVID-19, but also equity, preparing workforce for the future and changing jobs and that workforce resiliency, infrastructure investments and where we know that investments need to take place to ensure access to jobs and access to housing. And then finally, innovation, and innovation as the way we think about our industries and how we want our industries to be innovating, but how we collectively think innovatively in how we approach resilience. So all of that is important because those are the kinds of key words you need to think about for any project that would be submitted for funding, and Lynn and Nicole can get into that some more, but really this concept of resiliency is going to be really important as we think about funding support from EDA. I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to see if Mike has anything that he would want to add on the structure of the regional economic framework or anything else about really like the key components of the document. Mike, is anything you want to add? I can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm prepared to be having some audio or technical difficulties. So thanks for that, Amanda. I think that was a great overview. There's a few things I want to emphasize, and I understand. Well, we are really in unprecedented times with the pandemic, and then as a result, and then on top of that, the recent civil unrest related to the killing of George Floyd. Um, we have a lot of foundation for planning in our region, but I think one of the challenges that we're trying to ensure is that we get this document right, that we represent our region's unique strengths and particularly our challenges in an unprecedented time. There really is a magnifying glass that's happening with our regional weaknesses and threats. We're also having to, I think, address some, despite all of it's like a little bit like drinking from a fire hose in our region. We've done a lot of research and we've done a lot of planning. And part of this effort is a synthesis of that, and a synthesis that's really kind of done in a very meaningful and clear way. But we've also got some, some of the regional strategies that have required some discussion. And so I know there's probably, you've heard some sense that there's some anxiety about the timeline of your prospective applications, and I certainly am very sensitive to that. I wanted to strike a balance between really having a document that really puts our economic challenges front and center in a very clear way and help you support your application. So we're working really hard on this. We'll talk about kind of the next steps in terms of timeline, but yeah, we want to ensure that this document is consistent with regional policies, speaks to shared values, and really emphasizes how vulnerable populations are being affected. And that, in terms of resilience, I mean, we're trying to write to some moving targets. We're not in a steady state kind of environment. And so that's been a little bit of a challenge, and we're getting close. And I look forward. We have a schedule that we'll talk about, and I'm happy to answer questions about our role in this process and whatever your questions are. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yep, these are all really important points. I'll share now. I'm going to jump over that and get right into the 9 priorities. So I mentioned that the regional economic framework is based on the regional strategy work done over the last year, really 2 years within the Greater MSP Partnership, and getting to 9 core strategic priorities for our region. And for many of these strategic priorities, 10-year ambitions have been set. They haven't been set across all priorities yet. We're still in that process, but a great deal of interaction activity around developing these 9. There's a lot to be said about how each of these are represented in the document. I think it's important to know that inclusion, while it is its own strategic priority, racial inclusion is really built in across all of these priorities about removing or recognizing our weaknesses and opportunities and threats to growth, but then also identifying actions that would place inclusion and equitable growth at the forefront. So I want to make that point across all of these. Something to think about, since you haven't yet seen the document, is each of these priorities is written in a way that it represents a lot of potential work that could be done in our region. Since we are taking a slightly different approach with this regional economic framework from a typical SEDS for EDA, we've incorporated some flexibility so that you, as you think about your projects and what would be consistent and relevant with the regional economic framework, that you feel like your project is going to be represented in language. We've had communication with our county economic development partners, many city partners, many of our civic foundation partners and chambers, and this is, of course, Met Council with so much planning around affordability and transportation and mobility. So there's a lot of really existing language and strong representation for potential projects across these categories. But as you move forward, I do suggest, if you have any questions, that you reach out to us and we can provide more clarity. So I've covered what are the core sections. These are the 9 priorities. I can give a quick, just really quick overview of each of these, and then we'll talk about the timeline and can open it up for some questions before we move on to the funding opportunity. So job growth, I'll just mention, you know, there's a real focus on reinventing job growth efforts to respond to a changing economy. And we know in order to create jobs in our region, we have to have infrastructure to support that. And so, you know, many of our county partners have mentioned the need for infrastructure investment, land development to make the opportunity for development possible, for the attraction of new jobs to the region possible. We also want to make sure that we're addressing the need for business growth for our minority-owned businesses and small businesses. And so small business growth and, you know, building small business growth and leveraging the larger Fortune 500 larger company presence in the region to build stronger connections between small business and large business is also incorporated. Startups and innovation has a great deal of emphasis on diversifying our startup community and creating and reducing barriers to innovation and startup creation. We're building on a strong foundation, and so now it's really about building innovation into all of the activity in the region. And there are existing programs within the Forge North initiative that support a great deal of this, in addition to bringing in more of our venture capital partners to make them aware of the great innovative activity that's happening in the region. Talent migration builds on the Make It MSP initiative of attracting talent, but what we've learned through a great deal of survey work and data analysis is that it's not just attracting, it's retaining. And part of our ability to retain great professional talent is by being a welcoming place that's open to all. And so there is a great emphasis on being a place where everyone feels welcomed and everyone has access to opportunity. Racial inclusion, this as a standalone strategic priority is about integrating goals, of course, across all of the strategic priorities, but making sure that the BIPOC community can benefit from the economy and access all of the same opportunities that everyone has. And so it is, has a great deal of insight from the Center for Economic Inclusion, and we'll have a focus on an inclusive recovery, because we know as going through this time period post-COVID that it's more important than ever that we have a focus on everyone having access to that greatest access to recovery as we rebuild our economy. Skills and workforce, we know that this is a changing economy, and jobs that exist now may not exist 5 years from now, 2 years from now. So preparing for those jobs of the future is critical, and that means reskilling, it means upskilling, and it means making sure everyone has access to those training opportunities and to all jobs. Regional brand and image, this is really about how the world perceives our region. This is important for many reasons, but mostly that the world perceives this place as a welcoming place, as a place where they can come and have economic opportunity. And that's important in the way that we do our storytelling externally and to the world, and the way that we bring people into the region. Affordability has a very strong focus on housing. While it is kind of opened up to different types of affordability, housing is really the focus of this one, and ensuring that there's equitable access to affordable housing in all regions or all areas of our region. Transportation and mobility is certainly about infrastructure development, but mobility as a central aspect of this, that folks have access to jobs and are able to get to jobs from where they live. Lastly, new climate economy. This is slightly new. This would be new to anyone who hasn't already seen the list of strategic priorities, but I would just point out this is really about our region being prepared for climate change and harnessing our region's innovative capacities and assets to come up with innovative solutions to climate change. And that's not only through job creation opportunities and business creation opportunities, but through our infrastructure and through our planning, and making sure that we're thinking about innovation in a way that we respond to the changing climate. All right, I think that I've gone over my time a little bit, so I'm gonna stop it there. The last slide, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to speak quickly to this. EDA has, for many of their grant funding opportunities, they require us to identify areas of high distress. So for the CARES Act opportunity, we are all eligible. You'll hear that from Nicole and Lynn. But if there are projects that are going to be developed for areas of high distress, you'll want to make sure to point that out. And we can make this map available to anyone who has interest. This map identifies, and it will be included in the regional economic framework. This map identifies those areas that are economically distressed according to EDA. And it also layers on opportunity zones. This is also a priority for EDA. If there are projects that are going to be impacting areas within opportunity zones, that we make sure we document that. So again, this map will be in the regional economic framework, and then it can also be made available to anyone who would like to see it. You can reach out to me after this. Okay, last but not least, when will you get to see it? I know this is a question I've received from many partners. We're very actively working to get this drafted, the draft completed and getting it to adoption. These are the latest, and this is the dates for you to know moving forward. July 9th is the date that we will have this document ready for you to view. It will be open for public comment, and there will be time for you to review it and let us know if you have any input. That gives you a couple weeks to, if you start to think about projects that you would like to submit for funding and you haven't yet seen this, we do have a 2-pager overview that we will provide to you after this call so that you can see those 9 strategic priorities. You can see them described in more depth, and you can see more of an introduction to what this document does, what it, who's been involved with it, and how it can be used. After the document is open for public review and input has been provided, there will be a couple weeks to get all of that built into the document, and then it does go to adoption by Met Council on August 12th. So you may be wondering, can you apply for funding to EDA for the CARES Act dollars before this document is adopted? And we have received notification from Darren, our EDA representative, that you can apply, and we urge you to start to think about your projects for application right now, that you can submit a draft version or a pre-adopted version of the regional economic framework with your application to EDA. But they will not approve funding until they have seen, until the regional economic framework has been adopted. So yes, please proceed forward with projects now. If you have any questions about consistency, relevancy, we'll have this overview document, or you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Mike Larson, you can reach out to Andrea Firstan with Center for Economic Inclusion. All of our contact information will be on the 2-pager overview, and we can help you to make sure there's consistency. We've been working as fast as we can to make sure that this is the best document that it can be, and we understand, over the next few weeks, if there's any need, for support or information, reach out to us. But these are our dates, and we look forward to getting it done so that you can have this document and incorporate it into any project application to EDA. So I'm going to stop. I see there's some questions that have come in, and there's going to be time at the end, and so we can circle back to more questions. Looks like Maria Zimmerman is giving some more information. Maria is our fantastic, wonderful consultant who's been helping us through this process. So anything you see from her, that's the truth. So just follow along with her. How are economically distressed areas defined? So it looks like Maria's responded to that. In order for census tracts to be eligible, they have to meet one of 2 requirements by EDA, and that is around unemployment rate and around average income. And so those areas that are identified on the map hit the threshold for an unemployment rate that is above the national level, or an average income that was below the national level per EDA requirement. So that's how those are identified. Again, that's not a requirement to be eligible for these CARES Act funds, but it would look good to EDA that we're focused on areas of high distress. What are the opportunity zones? Okay, great. And it looks like Nicole added a link about opportunity zones. So that's a separate federal program. Opportunity zones were identified by states and localities. I guess it was probably a couple years ago when that program first started. And those are, again, census tracts that are mostly distressed areas. That was the focus for the development of opportunity zones. And if you want to learn any more about the actual use of opportunity zones and how investors can reach, incentivize development in these opportunity zones, you can go to that link. Okay, so let's hold off questions. Keep putting questions into the chat. We'll answer them as we go, and we can come back to them at the end. I want to switch over to Lynn. Lynn Knight is going to give us an overview of this CARES Act funding opportunity. So take it away, Lynn. I'm going to stop sharing. You can go ahead and share your screen. Lynn, don't forget to unmute.
All right, can everyone see my screen? Great. So I'm going to talk to you about how to tap into the EDA's new program for COVID-19. And it is a very flexible program, as you'll see. So for those of you who haven't worked with EDA, it's a small agency, relatively small, under the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's headquartered in D.C. and has regional offices. You're part of the Chicago regional office, and you can see the dark shaded states that are part of that office. In this disaster recovery effort, the CARES Act, your region got $225 million is the allocation that you will share with the other states in the region. So, meaning to say you will be competing for the grant money if you apply. It's not an automatic amount that goes to each state or to each organization. The entire country was declared as distressed because of COVID-19. So you don't necessarily need to identify additional distress, but if you have additional distress, it may put you in a more competitive position. Unless they run out sooner, the funds will be available through September 30th of 2022. Who's eligible? First of all, the state, but more than likely, it's going to go to county and city governments, special purpose units. So it can be a regional economic development organization, such as you have already formed. It can be institutions of higher education or consortia of higher ed and government, or higher ed and nonprofits, and nonprofit organizations with 501c3 status. They will occasionally certify other types of nonprofits, but it's primarily 501c3. And for a 501c3 to apply, they need to have a letter of endorsement from a political subdivision. Could be city, county officials, or the state. Here are their investment priorities for this particular opportunity. It's also, these are also their investment priorities in general, so this mirrors other programs that you may see on their website. So Infrastructure and non-infrastructure projects, anything to do with recovery and resilience, critical infrastructure, workforce development. They always want to promote manufacturing because that's a base industry. A program that could help you with exports or attracting foreign direct investments. And also you can get additional points for having a project in an opportunity zone. They want projects that are going to attract private investment and create jobs. They also like to see economic diversification and anything that promotes innovation. So I've got a couple of examples here. And note the dollar figures. And these are pretty typical across the country. The project at the top, the dark fiber broadband network, that is a very recent project that was just announced that is using this grant. The Southern Tier Network, which is a group of counties and city governments in the area that are working together. They got $1.5 million, and they're matching it with other federal, state, and local funding. Palo Alto, California got some money for critical stormwater infrastructure, and Mississippi County, Missouri also got some money for redesign and renovation of roads. Here's some other project examples that are very typical. $1 million to help develop a revolving loan fund. $191,000 to create a technical assistance and entrepreneurship training program in Oregon. The Tampa Bay Innovation Center in Florida got $7.5 million. That's actually to build buildings. And as you can see, there was a high share of local investment that was matched against the grant. A kitchen incubator and business accelerator in Kentucky got $986,000 matched by 766. And then the final example I've got here is a makerspace. It's a place where small businesses can try out their ideas and make small batches of things, and don't have to buy all their own equipment or have all their own warehouse. This is a $5 million center that was matched by 1.25 million. So that's approximately an 80% investment, which is very typical. For every $100,000 that EDA will give you, you have to match 22,000. That's how they calculate a 20% match. So as I just said, typically EDA will give 80% of the project cost. That is different for federally recognized tribes, can get up to 100%. What will make your proposal more competitive is if you document the distress caused by COVID-19. So how you could do that is, what have layoffs been like in your area? How many businesses have closed? Do you have a record of bankruptcies of businesses? This can prove economic distress. If you're already an area that has low incomes and high unemployment, that can also demonstrate. They want you to demonstrate that the project or initiative you're talking about is aligned with a SEDS. If you don't have a SEDS, you can use a regional economic development plan, a comp plan, a resilience plan, or a long-term recovery strategy if you have one. So you can use different things. For one community I lived in, we did not have a current SEDS, but we had a tourism redevelopment plan, and we used that as evidence that our project was a priority. What they want to see here is that the projects have been vetted by the community, that it's not just one organization's good idea, but that it's a generally accepted project. And so that's the SEDS is the strongest evidence you may have. Now, if you're asking for money to do a SEDS, you don't have to use a SEDS to get a grant from EDA. And I know you're doing a big regional plan, but in some cases, a county government or a tribal government or a city government might like to have their own sets. It depends on your circumstances. One of the requirements for the grant is to write a one-page narrative that you're going to attach to the grant application that will describe how COVID-19 impacted your economy and how your project outcome will fulfill a need. And maybe that need is simply to lift the economy back up after the economic disaster. But if you can describe how your scope of work supports economic recovery and resilience efforts, you will, it'll be more favorably received. And in any case, this is a requirement, this one-page narrative. This is a lot of words on the screen, but you will get a copy of this. This is how they evaluate the grant application. So you're going to put the grant application into grants.gov. On grants.gov, you can find the grant opportunity that has all of the details and all the forms you need. And these are the criteria that they're going to look at to evaluate you. And they will have different levels of evaluation. The first level will be Darren, your representative, will take a look at it and give you feedback. If it looks good to him, he will forward your concept onto his management at EDA Chicago. The executive team will look at it there. If they all agree it's a good potential project, they'll invite you to put an application in grants.gov. Once that application is complete, they will have a scoring team that will independently look at it and give you points based on these factors. So again, strength of the nexus to the COVID-19 impact, how responsive is it to the needs of the community? How feasible is it? I mean, do you have matching funds that you can contribute and identify right now? Of course, the best match is cash, but you can also use some in kind as well. Is it going to be sustainable? Are you developing a project that's going to need a continuous funding stream, and will it be there? As I mentioned, alignment with SEDS, alignment with EDA's investment priorities, which are available on their website. And then significance to the region. They're also going to want to look at you. So they will look at your organizational capability. I mean, do you have the capability to manage this project, both financially as well as human resources? So that's the investment evaluation criteria. One of the things they will look at, in your organizational capacity, they'll look at, have you ever had federal grants before and have you successfully managed them? Did you complete on time? There was one organization I worked with some time ago that had gotten grants, but they never filled out their quarterly reports, so they were in danger of losing them. So EDA didn't want to give them more. They were from another agency, but it's kind of like almost like your credit score. So you do want to strive to finish your grants on time, not go over or under budget. If you go under budget, sometimes they'll give you, if you finish the project under budget, sometimes they'll allow you to add on to the scope of work. But the last thing you want to do is keep asking for extensions, because it sort of affects your scoring and your management capability. Is there a deadline? No, but the funds are competitive. So if there are organizations all over the country vying for them, they could run out earlier than September 2022. If you go onto the grants.gov website, you can find the opportunity of PWEAA 2020, and it'll show you the entire package of the funding opportunity, which you can read thoroughly, and all the forms that you need to fill out. So this is my last slide. Just some advice for grant writing. Familiarize yourself with EDA's website. It's a very content-rich website, but you'll see lots of examples of their priorities, how they evaluate things, and projects that have been recently awarded. You can search topics. So if you want to do a broadband project, you can type in the search box, broadband feasibility study, and it'll tell you the latest projects that they have funded elsewhere. That gives you good ideas. One of the things you've got to do is you've got to vet your ideas with Darren. Don't just go straight to grants.gov and fill out a whole application. They want you to vet your ideas first so that they can help you refine them and weed out something that may not get funded. Once you do start your grant, you'll open up a workspace in grants.gov, and it'll come up with all the forms that are fillable forms online. I like to start them in Word first. That Form 900 is really hard. It's got a lot of places for narrative, and you don't really want to have to try to edit online in a PDF. Getting letters of support and collaboration will get you more points. You know, favorable consideration is a great deal. They love to see regional cooperation and support for projects. And you know, if you need something in a hurry, just know it can take a lot of time to do the application correctly and thoroughly. And you know, you want it to be thorough and complete when you put it in, so that they don't have to come back and ask for things. They're saying now that they want to get grants approved as quickly as 60 days in advance, 60 days from receiving a complete application. But again, they don't want to have, little findings of things that are missing. So familiarize yourself with the required forms first. If you need help, our group is available to help. I have written 18 successful grant applications, and I've learned a lot along the way. If you need help refining your idea or help with actual grant writing, just let us know. And there's my contacts. Thank you. I don't know if we're going to take questions at the end or take questions now.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll go over to Nicole, and she can add her great tips and tricks, and then we'll circle back with questions. But
okay.
I would remind just everybody, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end, or some could be answered as we go. But we'll go ahead and carry on and have Nicole add her information. Thank you, Lynn.
Well, thank you. I'm going to be a little bit more informal, and I might repeat what some of the last two gals have already kind of gone over, so I apologize. But as Amanda said, I'm the Executive Director of Region 9 Development Commission. So we were created by state statute in 1969, and we started in 1972. We have 9 counties, 72 cities, 147 townships, and 33 school districts. And so we are an EDD, federally designated, as Amanda had shared. So that means we have to have our SEDS updated every 5 years. We have to do an annual performance report, APR, every year to be updated, et cetera. So I've been at Region 9 for just about 8.5 years. So I'll share with you my experience and a few grant examples just to hopefully kind of help you brainstorm what projects might be possible. And the first thing I would say that I shared with Amanda is there's been grants where I thought that would not be that appealing or exciting to EDA, and then they work. And then there's been other grants where I'm all gung-ho and I think it's so perfect, and then they haven't been as excited. So some of my topics or my tips or tricks would be, number one, read the NOFO very carefully. Know what the funding is for and how that project is going to satisfy its objectives. So again, that might seem really obvious, but I would just want to, a mistake happens more than you think. So just really read that, check in with Darren. Like we said, can't say it enough, make sure you're having good communication with Darren Fleener as Economic Development Rep for Chicago's 6th state area. And so really spend some time developing a detailed scope of work before a staffing plan. So we've learned this kind of the hard way, where we've had staff turnover in the middle of a grant, and we had the exact title and the exact name of that person in the grant. For all of you folks who've done grants like this, Investigator 1, Investigator 2, so that would be one of my tips and tricks. So really do the detailed scope of work first, then think about the staffing plan. So I know we've spent a lot of times on things that we've had to go back and check. Be able to match the existing economic needs with the project scope. Again, that sounds elementary, but if not, EDA will not consider the project. And so be able to do the economic impact analysis, such as the job creation, economic growth potentials, things like that. Make sure you really have that. And if you don't have the skills, then partner with someone or another entity who does have those skills, such as input-output models, IMPLAN, RIMS 2, etc. And then again, my last one of my other tips here was have the local EDR, in this case Darren Fleener, proof your draft before submitting. Please don't submit it without him reading it, because if he is not on board, the project doesn't have a very great chance of being funded. That chance would be very low, I would say, from my experiences. And then I had a few other things written down I wanted to kind of share. So some of the projects that the federal EDA has funded Region 9, since I've been with Region 9, is we had a project for Highway 169 between Mankato and St. Peter, where they had to raise the road above the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain. Those 100-year floods were happening about every other year. And so my first year in 2012, we had our then EDR, Dennis Foldenauer, who now does still work in the Chicago office. We were throwing all these ideas at him, and what about this, and what about this, and no, that's not possible, no, that won't work. And I finally just pleaded ignorance. I said, all right, well, where do you have funding? And he said, disasters. And so then we got this conversation going, like, well, what if a road floods? It creates an economic development disaster. And so admittedly, at that moment, it felt like a stretch, and he's like, wait, tell me more. And so that resulted in us introducing the federal EDA to MnDOT. And so MnDOT was the one that received the $9.8 million to raise the grade between Mankato and St. Peter. So that's just one example. And then for the city of Madelia, that is in Watonwan County. And if you remember a couple of years ago, they had a downtown fire where about 8 of their businesses were taken out. The Region 9 did a lot of technical assistance for them. So we were able to advocate, and it helped having EDA involved, where we were able to show them and give them the tour and have a lot of videos and e-newsletters showing updates on Medelia's recovery from the fire. But we were able to create an economic resiliency plan for the community. And then what surprised me is I wouldn't have thought this was going to get, the second half was going to get funded, but it did, because EDA was able to hear directly from the city and the chamber director and the stakeholders. And they said, we want to tell the community or the other neighboring communities, we're open for business. Come to Madelia, we need to tell our story and really brand ourselves. And so what we were able to get funded was able to create a marketing and communications plan. That's exactly what the community said they needed. And so I'm just trying to provide some of these examples, trying to wrap your head around, because you really have to think through some of these projects of what might be attractive to them, what are your greatest needs. So I just wanted to share a few examples. Disaster recovery, Amanda had already kind of gone over that. So really proving that economic distress, if you have that, make sure you're telling the story, and or if the area has been designated as a disaster due to floodings, other reason. And opportunity zones, I can't say that enough. So if you are working in an opportunity zone, make sure you're mentioning that 5 times. That is definitely, the administration is very much behind opportunity zones, and to really tell that story is important. So for instance, we're doing a lot of work in Waseca, and you know, the city's not just shy of 10,000, and we were trying to help tell their story and the things that we wanted to do. And we were kind of saying this a couple of years ago, and it was like, oh, no. And I'm like, well, they have an opportunity zone. Oh, wait a minute. You know, because first they had the job loss from a major printer, a paper company going out of town, and, you know, job loss, et cetera. And it was first like, oh, okay, well, you know, but then as soon as we said opportunity zone, then it's that 80-20 match came into play, and then that kind of took our application and rose to the top. And so with Waseca, we were able to do a manufacturing resource study. And so now this will lead us to the next month, we'll be looking to put in a public works grant to kind of build something and to look at that. So I wanted to share that example. And then all of our work with Waseca and for manufacturing, that had come out of an IMCP. So if you remember in the Obama administration, there was an Investing in Manufacturing Community Partnership. And that was a grant we went after to receive, to go after our whole looking at the medical device supply chain. And that plan is called MedTech Connect. And so again, it's a little bit different than what we're talking about today, but I just wanted to share some examples. And then again, with opportunity zones, she kind of stole my thunder earlier, but make sure you're saying resiliency. Resiliency, resiliency, that is the word. So really focus on that. I can't say that enough. I don't know that before it would have been as, I'm not trying to think of the right word, as supported as or understood until the recent activities of what's happening around the world. But really the racial inequities, and now that the world is finding out about, you know, Minnesota, we're not the best. We're one of the toughest, rough, you know, for racial inequities. So I think that would be something that they would now more understand. This is something that I've been trying to get behind before, where the then Assistant Secretary, Dr. John Fleming, I had kind of shared with him before. I said, you know, we really want to look at doing an immigration impact study and or kind of New Americans impact study. And that wasn't they weren't as excited about that, but we wanted to really help tell the story why we, Region 9, are doing a lot of welcoming communities work, because we know it's economic development, but at that time, EDA hadn't really viewed it as economic development. And so I hope that will change a little bit more, and we can do more of that impact analysis to help tell the story of our Black, Brown, and Indigenous community members, you know, how they're contributing, etc. So I think maybe that will change. A few other topics I had kind of tried to pitch to EDA, but I wasn't as successful, was along the welcoming communities. And so again, we've received private foundation money, and we haven't gone after any federal grants to really look at how that's economic development. Climate change and for our region, especially Waseca, hemp, are two areas that I weren't as excited for. So again, it's really knowing your region, telling the story, and then also then reading that NOPO and what really matches. And so sometimes it's hard when you're so passionate about a specific project and you know it has regional significance, and you just can't quite tell the story. So I always kind of have a laundry list of my wish list of projects of like what I'd want to have if and when the certain funding would come. And then also I'm going to make a plug for our national organization, NATO, the National Association of Development Organizations. Admittedly, I serve on their board of directors, so not trying to push it. But for me, I came from the outside. I was in the private sector before. I was not doing economic development, and NATO has been really helpful for me to have FaceTime with the federal EDA. And so that's been fantastic. If nothing else, having that network of people to just bounce ideas off of, and then also to just have that FaceTime with EDA to really create the relationships. That's been something that's helped make me and in Region 9 successful. Of course, I should be in Telluride right now for our summer board meeting. So that was still on my Outlook calendar, kind of reminding me of like, but anyway, moving on. So creating those relationships has been really fantastic for me. Yeah, and then also I did write down, in my opinion, it didn't seem like they, EDA were as excited about broadband as infrastructure. And I think now that tide is completely turning, that they are saying, yes, broadband is infrastructure. So go after that. I think that's, you know, really wise. But again, I could be wrong. We had a grant we just found out about on Friday that we were like, when can we start? We're ready to go. We're gonna do a visualization of asset mapping, and with Region 5 out of Staples. And we had the grant, was great, ready to go, and then they turned us down. And it, you know, felt shocking because we think you cross all of the, you know, dot all the T's and, you know, yeah, you know what I'm saying? So you still get kind of disappointed sometimes, but then other times, you know, it works out and it's positive. So if I can be of help to anyone, you can go to our website, RNDC, as in Region 9 Development Commission. And then under the what we do has the community development and the SEDS, and then Medelia Plan, MedTech, you know, some of the documents that I referenced, if that's helpful. But again, I think trying to really work in the racial inequities and the equity gap, I hope that that's something, a model we continue to move into. That's my opinion, not on behalf of anyone else, but I guess I'll leave it at that. I have no idea how long I spoke.
Thanks, Nicole. That's perfect. I think you had just a ton of really great insight there. And I know a lot of questions have come up for me as I've listened to both you and Lynn, and certainly how I think maybe others may be forming questions as they think about this opportunity. You know, I also want to remind folks that, Greater MSP is a partner to you if you want to discuss any project ideas. We also have in-plan economic impact capabilities. So if you're looking for support with doing any economic impact modeling, let me know, to that point that Nicole brought up. So in terms of like putting together projects, I get asked like, well, it's really hard to come up with this project. I think the idea is this COVID impact and demonstrating how a project would respond to the COVID crisis. And as Nicole mentioned, this concept of resiliency is really important. A question you may be thinking about is hiring a recovery or resiliency coordinator position. That could be done at the city level, the county level, the regional level. Nicole or Lynn, do you have any advice or thoughts about approaching these funds for hiring for a position and how that could be approached in the application?
My first thoughts would be, or to use the example of the St. Cloud area, I believe the city of Melrose. No, in St. Cloud they also received one, and maybe Melrose, but they had an economic recovery coordinator. So from my experience, when we're talking about resiliency and recovery, that seems to be what EDA kind of offers up first. Of the for instance of, well, you could build in to have an economic recovery coordinator. That's one of their first kind of examples. And so in my example of Waseca, that's what the city, we wrote the grant essentially for the city, and then they were able to go after and have the funding for a two-year economic recovery coordinator. So that is something that they get and they understand. And so if you're looking for something very tangible, that's very common.
I have seen these for natural disasters, but I have not seen them yet for COVID-19. Nicole, have you seen them specifically for COVID-19?
Not specifically, but what I can share is that since we are an economic development district, we will be receiving the $400,000 to respond to COVID. And so we had to create our own plan for what the COVID recovery would look like in our region and what we would do. And so in our instance, we are going to be hiring more staff to look at recovery and resilience. So I can't speak to any other specific other than we were able to go after the non-competitive because of being EDD. And then it's just, otherwise it's the non-competitive grants. That's what I'm aware of. Nothing else specific.
Okay.
And how about another question that you may be thinking of, especially as broadband's been coming up a lot, and the COVID relationship being, demonstrating that many people are working from home, especially in communities that do not already have good access to broadband, that we would be enabling preservation of jobs and job creation by extending broadband. Can you guys speak to the construction versus non-construction application and what folks should be considering if they're approaching a construction project?
So
Broadband.
EDA does not have the big millions like you might find with HUD. So I've seen EDA money used a lot lately for broadband feasibility studies, which are designed to help you maximize what you're going to do and make a plan before you just go charging out and put it everywhere. But there's clearly a very strong case for it now that people are working from home and kids have had to go to school from home, so it's the nexus to the disaster is very strong, and they're promoting it heavily. But unfortunately, the money that they have available just really doesn't go that far. That example that I gave in New York, they had a large share locally and from the state to match against the EDA funds.
Yeah, and I think I've heard either from you, Lynn, or others, with the construction projects, it's a more detailed application, and if that is the approach that you are taking, you really do have to have a lot of those cost estimates already determined. It's likely to take you a longer, period of time to get prepared for.
Yeah, you need the environmental impact study as well.
So keep that in mind, anyone who may be considering construction, and that's infrastructure, utility infrastructure, but also like the construction of a building, a lot of that's going to have to be prepared. How about the match? So we know that EDA has said that for the CARES Act dollars, there's an 80% match, 20% local, and for tribes, that is 100% from EDA. You know, you've heard about the local match could come from in-kind. Can you describe what that actually looks like in the application, how you're showing the in-kind dollar match?
So that could be a donation of space, the value of space and rent. It could be a donation of time of subject matter experts. So I have a project right now, for example, where there are some university professors that are donating some of their time to the project. What they get out of it is, you know, it helps them with their tenure programs and gives them additional credentials. They've also got some grad students working on the project, so they're, you know, we're capturing the value of their time as well. It's a little bit harder to do that in advance if you don't know how much time people are going to put in. So you need, you know, you need commitments. You could also get corporate sponsorships if somebody is donating cash to the project. But most typically it's local match of government organizations that are going to, you know, contribute to the costs.
And to build off her comments, I would say one mistake, if I could jump back in my time machine and do it differently, is we did an agricultural resiliency plan for our region. And we thought having the local tech college, because they have a Center for Agricultural Excellence, and then MSU, Mankato, to have them get involved, and then talking to farmers. I had no idea how difficult it would be to follow up with 3 different entities, and Minnesota Department of Ag, to get them to turn in their hours. And so that's no disrespect to any of those entities, but what I didn't think about was the realities of the timing of your projects. You don't want to have to do an extension. You do whatever you have to do to not have to do an extension for a grant. I was fighting ag weather, so when the farmers were available, up against the tech school calendar, up against MSU, Mankato's calendar, and then working with Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So keep that in mind. Sometimes I would just say put more money in personnel and not worry about the equipment or supply lines. Some of those little details can just make your life a little bit easier if you've got some cushion.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you just brought up another question I know has come up over time is, you know, there's so many potential projects in our region, and, you know, we've talked about a regional approach or like one big mega project that could go in for the whole region. And what I've heard others say, and you say, is, you know, this importance of, you know, the application representing the entity that is going to be on the hook for managing it and managing the cost, and that there's that actually trying to combine a lot of projects into one creates too much complexity. So I don't know if either of you wanted to expand on that, you know, you really need the project application to be specific to, you know, who is in charge of managing it, and that by combining multiple projects, you could add some unneeded complexity.
So collaborations are a good thing, but they make for complicated grant applications because you also need to have an MOU which spells out the roles. For example, who's going to manage the project? You need to have a project manager. Who's going to manage the money? If there are failures of any kind, how will that be handled? So you'll need all that. But sometimes, you know, the project could really benefit by having a couple of parties participate in it. You know, a city and county government, for example, or a university and a nonprofit, or a nonprofit and local government. So I don't know, consider that carefully. I've done it both ways, but I have to say I prefer grants where, you know, we're in complete control over the management, and then if we need other parties, we can subcontract with them rather than have them be co-applicants.
I think the only thing I build off of is really choose your partners well and think ahead 2 years. You know, it's of who's going to still be in position. If you're working at a county and you're working with a specific person, they're fantastic. And then a year and a half when they're really in the project or whatever that timing looks like, they leave, they have a different job, and then you're working with that next person. So that's maybe a little obvious, but just think that through, because you don't want to have to herd cats to get things turned in, whether it's finances or the in-kind hours, things like that. That can really, it becomes really putsy, and then that makes the project not that fun.
Okay, well, that's a list of some questions that I had thought about. I'd be happy to open it up if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question. I don't know if we're going to get like a flood of them, but if somebody wants to bring something up, this is a great time.
Hey, Amanda, this is Jake with HUD in Minneapolis. How you doing?
Hey, Jake, good to see you.
Good to see you too. You know, one of the things I want to make sure that there's time and space for, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on this call, but I would really like to see there be more prioritization just versus encouragement of these the SEDS and SEDS equivalent addressing racial equity. You know, I think I work on the North Minneapolis Promise Zone initiative, and I think one thing that, and you know, this may be anecdotal, but there was a Star Tribune article, for example, where some of the business owners who were in areas, you know, and this was before the civil unrest, but you know, some of the business owners who were white and in some of the more affluent parts of town were talking about how some of the city programs were really not providing as many funds to them as they were to some other parts of town in North and South Minneapolis, where it was mostly people of color. And what my concern is that if we don't explicitly prioritize the SEDS for racial equity, that we're back in the same boat that we've been in before. And so I'm wondering, you know, how can that be addressed in terms of saying we're not just encouraging addressing racial equity, we're saying it's explicitly prioritized?
That's a really great question. And, you know, I think that's why we're taking a pause right now to spend some more time to, you know, really come through the SEDS alternative, the regional economic framework, to, you know, represent that. And I know Tawana is on, you know, I don't want to put her on the spot, but if she wanted to share any additional insight on how we're taking that step at this time, please do.
Well, first, thanks, Jake. Appreciate that note, and thanks to you and other folks from the North Side who are on the call, who led the championing of a SEDS designation several years ago when we first secured the Promise Zone designation, because we've been advocating for this for quite some time, and certainly, to your point, need to be intentional about the not only racial equity goal setting and elevation, but also prioritizing which applications as a unit across the region we prioritize and going after, and being very intentional about the goals that we can achieve as a region by securing resources from the EDA. And I think, as Nicole elevated earlier, certainly the EDA, is our understanding, has not only through CARES resources, but also through other outlined resources, has started to prioritize dollars specifically for increasing economic competitiveness through a racial equity lens. And so I see that as the center's role in this partnership with the Met Council and Greater MSP, is to be able to elevate those organizations throughout Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the surrounding metro area, who have been doing this work to both support business owners, entrepreneurs, job seekers, and those employers throughout the region who have a commitment toward racially equitable outcomes, in securing resources to accelerate that work in our region in ways that we haven't been able to do thus far with local resources. And so we're all in for that, and are leveraging the National Center for Inclusive Economic Competitiveness in our work in this partnership to be able to do that, and would love to be able to meet certainly with you. I know NJCT is represented on the call as well, and so would love to talk offline after this about what that looks like.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. And just, you know, the last, I think, point of clarification from my end is, you know, I think everyone understands that there's everyone's been impacted by COVID, you know, across the whole region. And I think that's completely fair, you know, to acknowledge that. But it's also, you know, past time to acknowledge that people of color have been, you know, disadvantaged, you know, economically and otherwise for much longer. And again, that's my concern, is that we don't do what we've done in the past, is take everything and all the problems and try and jam them into a one-size-fits-all solution. And we really do start prioritizing, you know, prioritizing, you know, the fact that it's just now it's a double whammy for communities of color. And I really want to make sure that we get real explicit about what we're trying to do here, instead of, you know, we're all Minnesota nice and that's cool, but let's get past being Minnesota nice and have some real conversations about this stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks for your voice.
Thank you for allowing it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that has been emerging in the last couple of weeks, as we've really been focused on the funding opportunity itself, is, you know, how do we matchmake? How do we work together? How do we create these like-minded interests around funding opportunities? And while we don't have to limit ourselves to one regional application, you know, this region has a lot of entities who would be interested in funding. I do think it makes a lot of sense facilitating these opportunities to bring people together around common interest. And as Nicole and Lynn have both mentioned, you know, showing this regional alignment, showing that there are many stakeholders involved is important. So, you know, after this call, if we can help facilitate more gatherings of voices around our opportunities for funding, you know, I know Greater MSP would be happy to help make that happen. But certainly reach out to others. You know, we're under some time crunch because this is a competitive program and it is likely to be oversubscribed, but we do want to get it right. So I just welcome everybody to follow up and see if we can help, if Greater MSP can help facilitate those kinds of conversations. We have just a few minutes left. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen because I just have
Amanda, do we have time for a quick question? This is Jaquel Heider.
Please, yeah, go for it, Jaquel.
So my question's regarding transportation. You know, we had talked about a couple examples, like for instance, the 169 project that really had to do with disaster recovery, so separate from COVID. So my thought is, and this might be a loaded question, is where do you begin to start building the argument of maybe an existing transportation gateway into a community that has been in need of funding for decades? We've got a few in Anoka County, you know, that somehow that's tied to COVID. Would you say it has to do with, you know, resiliency, that these corridors are already struggling before COVID and so they're less likely to recover as quickly, you know, because of their transportation issues? What are the group's thoughts on that have had experience applying for these grants?
Yeah, I mean, Nicole and Lynn, I'd be interested in hearing what you think with the transportation needs and how that would be viewed as for the CARES Act funding itself, and how to tie that with COVID.
Lynn, do you want to take a jump at that first?
I think I would need to know a little bit more specifics. I've certainly seen a lot of transportation type projects funded by EDA. They're like, you know, they're like roads though. Not something that's going to be ongoing and have an ongoing cost.
Yeah, maybe Jaquel, we can follow up on that, and if you know Lynn and Nicole have some more time to think about it. You know, I worry, you know, EDA is going to put a lot of scrutiny on these applications to show this very clear nexus with COVID, and so we have to be super specific about representing the job creation opportunity and job preservation opportunity associated with that funding and how it, you know, how it related to COVID. But let's please follow up around that. On that note, you know, we have just a couple minutes. I wanted to, as a final slide, just remind everybody that, you know, we're here to help, and you know, we Greater MSP, Met Council, and Center for Economic Inclusion are working on getting the Regional Economic Framework document ready to share, and you will have a time to look at it. Jake, to your point, you know, we really do want to get it right and make sure that we're representing our region's opportunities and challenges effectively. You know, we do want to help partners connect around potential project opportunities. So, you know, think about that. What would be a good way for us to facilitate that further? As I mentioned, we do have a second session that is planned for June 25th, where we will have Darren Fleener on the line. It would be great to be able to come to him before that with some of these project ideas so that he could respond. Or certainly we can ask him lots of questions in real time. He said he likes the rapid fire approach of this kind of call, so that will be a follow-up. Greater MSP and Met Council both have a lot of data, as does Center for Economic Inclusion, around COVID impact in our community. So if you're looking for help in developing a narrative around COVID impact, you know, we can help with that. Finally, sorry, that's my dogs. We can help with, Greater MSP would be happy to write letters of support for applications. So that's all for me. Sorry guys, I have my contact information here. And thank you so much for participating today. We will follow up with an email with the recording. We'll just dub out the dog noise, recording of this conversation and the slides. And thank you all for participating.